Almost all of us have been tempted at one time or another to go back to an old relationship. For whatever reason, we want it back. So why do we do that? What's the psychology behind that, whether you were the dumper or the dumpee? So why can't you stop thinking about your ex? Maybe you're obsessively focused on them. You've got tunnel vision for them and you're just not able to get past them, even though you're not together anymore. When a relationship ends, it has a tendency to feel a little bit like a drug withdrawal, like a drug addict who goes cold turkey. They got the shakes and everything, and they're trying to white knuckle their way through it, but it's hard. And it's easy when you're in the throes of that to sort of want to throw in the towel and go back to your drug of choice, in this case, your ex, and revisiting those memories with your ex. All the fun things that you did, maybe the sex, maybe the connection, maybe the emotional connection, whatever it is, gives us those little flashes of euphoria and that dopamine and serotonin spike to the brain that just gives us that drug-like euphoric feeling. So why do past lovers come back? Maybe they dumped you, but now they're initiating reconciliation. So why do they do that? The first most obvious reason, especially if they left you for somebody else, is that they've realized the grass isn't greener on the other side. A lot of the times, probably up to 80% of the time, it's the woman who dumps the guy. And oftentimes, she will do what's called monkey branching from you to another guy. In other words, she's already kind of got your replacement lined up before she breaks up with you. And her feelings of love for you have been diminishing for a little while. And maybe her attraction for this other person has been growing for a little while. Maybe she hasn't acted on it. I'm not suggesting that she's cheated on you necessarily, but she has this person lined up. So it seems, especially from your perspective, that she's gone from you to them extremely quickly. But a lot of the time they come back because they didn't really have time to fully formulate that relationship. It didn't grow from the ground up. It grew very quickly and almost in a kind of a limerence kind of way. If you're not familiar with limerence, it's this kind of obsessive, lustful obsession with somebody else that's not really love and it's not really rooted in anything real. But to the person experiencing limerence, it feels very real. It feels like, oh my God, this is the love of my life. I can't live without this person. And they get tunnel focused on this other person to the expense of everything else. But limerence always has an expiration date. If you want to dive in deeper on that, if you think that might be true in your situation, check out this video card right up here on the screen where I walk you through limerence and how to know where your partner is on the spectrum, on the timeline. That way you can predict when it might be ending. But a lot of the time they do come back when they've realized that the grass wasn't greener like they thought it was going to be elsewhere. Sometimes ego causes us to break up in the heat of the moment. And then later we realize, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. That was just my ego reacting in the moment. And it wasn't really what I wanted to do. Sometimes ego prevents us in that moment from acknowledging that, admitting our mistake and asking the person to come back. So ego is definitely an enemy in terms of reconciliation. And then lastly, it could be nostalgic moments or maybe upcoming birthdays or holidays or things like that. They trigger memories that we have with our ex and it makes us kind of nostalgic in that way. And we want that. And sometimes we try and recreate those memories with a new person, but it's just not the same. It feels hollow and flat because at the end of the day, this new person isn't your ex and you don't have the history with them that you did with your ex. And this is especially true if there wasn't real closure in the relationship. If it ended quickly, if your ex dumped you and then jumped into a relationship with somebody else very quickly and you didn't really have time to go through a grieving process or anything. A lot of the time, it's totally natural under those circumstances to not really want to let go. So what happens in our brains when we reconnect with an old flame? Most experts agree that it's psychologically intoxicating to reconnect with a former flame. The brain lights up in the same way a drug addict lights up. And I talked about this a minute ago where I compared the two things. But it's kind of like taking a hit of cocaine. It has the same effect on our brain that cocaine does. There's a senior research fellow at the Kinsey Institute named Dr. Helen Fisher, and she says that the brain develops pathways based on learned behaviors. But if you laid down powerful patterns of behavior with an ex, your brain retains traces of that circuitry. In other words, that rewired your brain to some small degree, and that doesn't go away just because the relationship ended. And even if you've bonded with somebody new, those patterns are still there, tied to the other person, and it's easy for things to kind of trigger those memories and reinforce that circuitry that's in your brain. So why do we dwell on past relationships? After a breakup, many of us feel bad about the breakup. That's certainly true if you got dumped. But even for the dumper, the person that did the dumping, they may feel incredibly guilty. They may feel sad. They may be mourning the loss of the relationship. Maybe they didn't want the relationship anymore, or maybe they met somebody new and they wanted to explore that. But only a sociopath wouldn't actually feel bad about ending the relationship and wouldn't feel guilty about ending the relationship, even if it was their choice. And that guilt can linger, and it can cause us both to not fully commit to the new person, if that's the situation, but it can cause us to also want to hold on to our ex, even if we dumped them. And that leads me to my next point. Is it a trauma bond? What is a trauma bond, and how would you know if you have one? It's most commonly used to describe the relationship between a narcissistic person and a quote-unquote regular person. Although I will say that most of the time, people who are drawn to narcissists have attachment wounds themselves. They may be codependent, they may have an anxious attachment style, or both. But a trauma bond can be difficult to spot. But essentially, if you are in a relationship with a narcissist, or were, they're going to go through different stages of how they treat you, essentially. And typically that starts with what they call love bombing and mirroring, where they're mirroring your behavior so that you really feel like, oh my gosh, this person understands me in a way that nobody else ever has. Causes you to let your guard down more than you ever have, causes you to be more vulnerable with them than you ever have before. And they're just love bombing you. They're giving you every trick in the book, everything they could possibly do to you to make you feel loved, to where you feel like this person loves you more than anybody else you've ever been in a relationship with. But a trauma bond is kind of a maladaptive way for our brains to process the ultimate trauma and abuse that comes out of that. Because once the love bombing ends, then they can begin to be manipulative, they can be deceitful, they may cheat on you. That's pretty common in those kind of scenarios. And then eventually they discard you for somebody else. A trauma bond is kind of a way that our brains come up with in order to kind of deal with that abuse. And some victims of trauma bonding actually think that if they understand a person at a deep level, if the abuser understands me at a deep level, and if I understand them at a deep level, then it makes it easier for me to predict behavior patterns. And so we kind of don't want to let go of that, because we kind of know what we're going to get with this person, even if it's not good or not always good. So essentially, it's a strategy our brains use to kind of keep us safe. And I know that sounds crazy, but it is kind of how it works. And a lot of that information came from a woman named Cecile Tucker. And she's a registered clinical counselor who specializes in trauma. But it is worth pointing out, though, that even somebody who is narcissistic, maybe they even have full-blown NPD, they also are trauma bonded to you. So it's not just that they're evil and malevolent and out to destroy you. They have emotional attachment issues as well, just like you probably do. And it's those issues that kind of brought the two of you together. There's a YouTube channel called Cluster B Milkshake. The woman who runs the channel is named Sarah. I absolutely love her channel. She is a self-professed female narcissist on the cluster B spectrum, and her videos are fantastic. If you think that you might be narcissistic, or you might be drawn to people who are narcissists, I want you to check out her channel, because she really humanizes people with narcissism, and she sheds a lot of light that other so-called channels that talk about narcissism can't, because the people doing the videos, like me, aren't narcissists, and we don't have that level of insight, even if we've been in relationships with people who are narcissists. She just sheds a completely different light on the subject. So I don't normally recommend other people's YouTube channels on my channel, but in this case, I do actually want you to check out her channel. So check it out right up here. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.